Our story begins in the ancient kingdom of Persia, under the reign of King Xerxes. It was during this time that the Jewish people, having been carried away from their homeland, lived scattered across the kingdom as exiles. Among them was a young, beautiful woman named Esther, whose courage and faith would lead her to a great destiny. In the citadel of Susa, King Xerxes held a grand banquet to showcase the wealth and splendor of his reign. The banquet lasted for 180 days, and at its end, the king held a 7-day feast for all the people in the capital city. On the final day, King Xerxes, in a merry mood, commanded his queen, Vashti, to appear before him and display her beauty to the people. But Queen Vashti, in her wisdom and dignity, refused. The king, in his anger, consulted his advisors. They advised him that, as queen, Vashti's disobedience would embolden other women throughout the empire to disrespect their husbands. Therefore, she was deposed as queen, and a decree was sent out throughout Persia for a search to begin in search of a new queen. Among the women chosen for this search was a young orphan named Esther, who was raised by her cousin Mordecai. Esther was known for her beauty, wisdom, and grace, and though she was a Jew, she kept her heritage a secret, as Mordecai had instructed her to do. After a year of preparation and beauty treatments, Esther was summoned to appear before the king. When Esther appeared before King Xerxes, she found favor in his eyes. The king, captivated by her beauty, chose her to be his queen, crowning her in place of Vashti. Despite her newfound status, Esther continued to keep her Jewish identity hidden. Meanwhile, Mordecai, who sat at the king's gate, overheard a plot to assassinate the king by 2 of his eunuchs. Mordecai quickly reported the plot to Esther, who relayed the information to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. The 2 eunuchs were subsequently investigated, found guilty, and hanged, thus saving the king's life. Some time passed, and King Xerxes promoted Haman, an Agagite, to the highest position in the kingdom after himself. Haman was a man filled with pride, and he demanded that all of the king's servants bow before him. But Mordecai, a man of strong faith, refused to bow down, for he would bow only to God. This enraged Haman, who, in his hatred, decided to seek the destruction not only of Mordecai, but of all the Jews in the kingdom. Haman cast lots, called Pur, to determine the day on which to destroy the Jews. The 13th day of the 12th month was chosen. He then went to the king, misrepresenting the Jews by claiming that they were a rebellious and disobedient people who did not obey the king's laws. Haman promised to pay 10,000 talents of silver into the king's treasury in exchange for permission to destroy the Jews. The king gave his signet ring to Haman, and a decree was sent out throughout the empire, condemning the Jews to death on the 13th of Adar. When Mordecai learned of the king's decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and went into the city, crying out in grief. The Jews throughout the empire fasted, wept, and mourned for the destruction that was coming upon them. Esther, unaware of the decree's full extent, was informed by her attendants of Mordecai's grief. She sent him clothes, but he refused them. She sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, to find out what was troubling him. Mordecai revealed the decree to Hathach and urged Esther to go before the king and beg for mercy for her people. Esther was terrified. She knew that anyone who approached the king without being summoned faced certain death, unless the king extended his golden scepter to spare them. She sent word to Mordecai, explaining her fear, but Mordecai's response was resolute. "Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed." Mordecai's words pierced Esther's heart, and she decided to act. She sent word to Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Susa to fast for 3 days and nights, and she and her maids would fast as well. After the fast, she would go before the king, even though it might cost her life. "If I perish, she declared, showing remarkable courage. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, where the king sat on his throne. When the king saw Esther, he extended his golden scepter toward her, sparing her life. Esther touched the scepter, and the king asked, "What is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom." Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet that she had prepared for them. At the banquet, the king again asked Esther what her request was. She invited them to another banquet the next day, where she would reveal her petition. Haman left the banquet that day in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, unmoved by his honors, his anger flared. He went home and boasted to his wife, Zeresh, and his friends about the great honors the king had bestowed on him. But he said he could not be truly happy as long as Mordecai refused to bow. Zeresh and his friends advised him to build a gallows and request the king to hang Mordecai. That very night, the king could not sleep, and he ordered the book of the Chronicles to be brought and read to him. As the events were read, the king learned that Mordecai had exposed the plot to assassinate him, but no reward had been given to Mordecai. The king asked, "What honor or dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this?" Just then, Haman entered the king's court to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai. But before he could speak, the king asked him, "What shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor?" Haman, thinking the king was referring to him, suggested royal robes, a horse, and a public parade. To his horror, the king commanded Haman to do all of this for Mordecai. Haman, utterly humiliated, rushed home and prepared for the second banquet. During the banquet, the king asked Esther once more what her request was. She revealed that Haman was the enemy and adversary who sought to destroy the Jews. The king was enraged and left the room. When he returned, he saw Haman falling on Esther's couch, pleading for his life. The king exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence?" In a fit of fury, the king ordered Haman to be hanged on the very gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai. With Haman's death, Esther and Mordecai gained favor in the king's eyes. The king gave Esther the estate of Haman, and Mordecai was promoted to Haman's position. Esther pleaded with the king to reverse the decree, and although it could not be undone, the king allowed her to write a new decree. The Jews were granted the right to defend themselves against their enemies. On the 13th of Adar, the Jews defended themselves and triumphed over their enemies. They celebrated their victory with great joy, and the Feast of Purim was established as an annual celebration to remember their deliverance. The festival is a time of feasting, charity, and rejoicing. Mordecai became second in rank to King Xerxes, honored by his people for his role in saving the Jews. His and Esther's story became a powerful reminder of God's providence, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the courage that God gives to those who trust in Him.